Hello, and welcome to the Arrow Video Not podcast with Sam and Dan. It's not a podcast because it's live, and we have a guest, which is quite rare. My name is Dan Martin, special effects artist and podcaster, and I'm joined, as ever, by my beautiful co-host,
Sam Ashurst, and I'm a writer, I'm a director, and I am the J to Dan's Silent Bob. Though actually we're probably both J, aren't we? Because we never shut up. But we do have the actual Silent Bob, Kevin Smith, director of all of your favourite movies, including Mallrats. He will be joining us shortly. But before he does, we have a world exclusive preview of the Arrow video trailer for Mallrats. So let's have a watch.
Brandy is the past. You face forward, or you face the possibility of shock and damage. Where the hell did that come from? What's going on here? You know about this game show thing they got going on here? Well, we need you guys to somehow ensure that it doesn't happen.
Is that it? We're gonna do that anyway.
Really? Why?
What else are we gonna do? Sound Bobby stole a schematic. I found a weakness, just like the fucking Death Star. Only problem is LaForge. Who's LaForge? You don't know what LaForge is? Phase 1. First you take a run at LaForge with the sock full of quarters. Clock him on his headpiece and knock his ass out cold. So let's try this again. You tie to the roof and you jump off, then swing up to the stage and knock out the pin.
Come on, Dennis, What the fuck? You fucker!
Is that ingenuity or what?
And so there we go. And of course, Mallrats was a comic book movie before there were comic book movies. And you have some comics from your own personal collection to show off, don't you?
just like a small handful. I think, yeah, like, you know, I was into comics, although weirdly not necessarily superhero comics at the time. And it was actually the first of the Clerks comic books that drew me across to the fact that there was a view askew crossover into the comic world. I mean, which is super obvious, like it should happen. But it was Evan Dorkin doing artwork for the Clerks comics. I was a big Milk and Cheese fan, which I'd got to through Deadline, which I got into through Tank Girl. So yeah, like these two worlds combining for me was huge. And obviously Kevin talks about Mallrats not necessarily finding its audience straight away. But I was one of the ones passing the tape, you know, like every time I spoke to someone who felt like they had a similar interest, it was an opportunity to bring them into this fold, to be like, well, fuck me, they've made a movie for you, and somehow it's kind of a secret.
This is it. And I was exactly the same. I mean, I was very much a 90s superhero comic book kid. My favorites were Wolverine and Batman, so Mallrats was the movie for me. And we have the director of Mallrats with us now. Kevin Smith, please join us in the chat.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, hello, Kevin.
Excellent to hear your very sonorous on the ears accents, man. I've been surrounded by American accents for a few months. Lovely to be here talking about this, man. Very excited that Arrow bothered with this fucking movie at all. They've kept it relevant, man. Like that's all I could say. The moment, I've said it in a few interviews this week, the moment like they told me that Arrow was doing Mallrats, I cried because I was like, all right, so the movie's still relevant. That means I'm still relevant because, you know, they're the modern day Criterion, man. They're doing the Lord's work when it comes to home video and stuff. So I was flattered and bewildered and thankful, grateful that a quarter century later, people are still talking about the movie. Oh,
that's awesome. We'll just jump straight into our pre-prepared questions, if we may. I know we've got a limited amount of time.
We have as much time as you want, man. We'll go until we get them all.
That is fucking great news. I hope you're ready for the long haul.
Okay.
Obviously, a huge part of Clerks' appeal was that it was the epitome of indie film. Like it was this like punk, do-it-yourself, artist for the people. It made filmmaking feel achievable, like within reach for people. Obviously, what it did for you was it opened the gateway to the studio system. Like you were able to move from this tiny fucking film to this comparatively massive fucking film. How do you feel your career would have differed if Mallrats had been the massive success everyone thought it was going to be?
You definitely would not have had Chasing Amy. We still would have done Dogma eventually, because Dogma was written before Clerks, so that was always kind of waiting in the wings. But you would have had a Chasing Amy that was set in high school, because we were in post on Mallrats, and Jim Jacks, one of the producers, was like, we went to see Clueless, and he was like, this is, you know, you were talking about that story about a guy falls in love with a lesbian, set it in high school. And, you know, which was either a very progressive thought at the time, or him just essentially wanting to copy Clueless, which I think it was more the latter. So if Mallrats had been a success, there would have been a Mallrats 2. But before that, there would have been this Chasing Amy movie set in high school instead. I think if I'd been validated with Mallrats, like I think if it had done really well, like if it had made $100 million, done Animal House business, my movies would be a lot more antic. I would lean into that. I'd be, you know, trying to outdo Mallrats over and over again and stuff. And I didn't feel the need to do that for a couple years. Like the closest we got to the tone of Mallrats was Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back 6 years later. And that was only after I felt safe and secure. You got to realize when Mallrats came out, did so poorly, that was it. Like you don't get a phone call from the fucking mayor of Hollywood or something, but you don't get phone calls, period. And people stop talking about the future and stuff. So it seemed like our fate was kind of written with the movie. And then, you know, by going back to my roots, by doing a low budget film, by doing Chasing Amy the way it should have been done, you know, that there was a redemption narrative, like all the press wrote about, like, you know, he burst onto the scene with Clerks and then flopped with Mallrats and now rises like a phoenix with Chasing Amy. That was, you know, good for business, that people like telling that story. So that fed the success of Chasing Amy. So, you know, poor Mallrats had to be sacrificed on, you know, the altar of public consumption before I could really set my path for sure in film. Does that make sense? Like I knew I was going to do like a Jersey trilogy. I kept telling people like we're going to do 3 movies. Clerks is the first, and then Mallrats, and then at first I wouldn't say Chasing Amy or Dogma, but I just kept saying there were 3 because that seemed smart to make people be like, oh, there's 2 more. Well, we'll give them another chance. And I honestly feel that because I was always out there going like the New Jersey trilogy, the fact that Mallrats died should have killed the Jersey trilogy. But instead, you know, I just kind of pivoted back to low budget because that's what I was better at. You know, I'd made literally 1 film before Mallrats, and it was a low budget film, Clerks. So when it came time to pivot back in terms of Chasing Amy, I was more accustomed to working on the lower end of the pool. Like, you know, a $5 million budget, which is what Mallrats was in 1995, felt completely unnatural and uncomfortable. Suddenly we went from having like 3 people on our crew to 50, 60. And, you know, I understood everybody had a job and there's unions and stuff like that. And so, like, you know, on day 1, I've told the story many times. We did not even day 1. It was a pre-shoot day. We were in Minnesota, and before you start the shoot, you know, sometimes you like to do a pre-shoot day because it lessens your schedule and gets you a little bit ahead, and you're just listing it as a day for testing cameras, but you're actually shooting a piece of the movie in advance and stuff. You know, it's an old production manager trick that kind of puts you a little bit ahead of the game. The studio's like, oh, well, look how well they're doing and stuff. So it's probably so well known at this point, nobody even does it anymore. But back then, it was a thing. And so we had this pre-shoot day where we weren't shooting a scene with 35mm cameras. We were shooting a video camera sequence, and that's Ben Affleck and Renee Humphreys as Shannon Hamilton and Trish the Dish for their little porn, their little, you know, filmed sex scene that pops up in the third act and stuff. So we're shooting that. Didn't take long at all. I mean, you know, since it was a movie, like it took longer to set up and break down than like we would have done if it was just me and my two friends and some cameras and shit like that. But, you know, played the game, did multiple takes, even though on Clerks, like one take would have been enough and stuff. So, you know, pulled the taffy as long as I could, and we were done in like an hour. And so, you know, the Fernando, who is our AD, was like, all right, that's a wrap on the pre-shoot day. Thank you, everybody. And so everyone starts picking shit up. The crew starts picking up shit. And so having made only one movie, which was the movie I made with my friends in a convenience store after dark, you know, I was like, well, I guess this is when we all clean up, because it was more democratic affair on Clerks. And so I started wrapping cable. And then Ben, who's, you know, been in the business longer than me, he'd been, you know, in like Days of Confused, of course, prior to us making Mallrats. But even further back, Ben had been a children's TV kid actor for a show called Voyage of the Mimi. So he'd been around sets for a long time, much longer than I'd ever been around sets. And so Ben comes over to me and he's like, you don't do that here. They got people, union people that do that. So put it down. You're making people mad. And I'm like, mad? What do you mean? He's like, that's their job. Like these union people, man, they don't ever do something that's a union job. And that was like the first piece of advice I got from someone my age in the business and stuff. So Mallrats, if it had been a success, if it had made like, you know, Tom Pollock, who was the head of Universal at that point, Tom Pollock, the head of the studio. Our movie was made half by Universal, half by Polygram. It was actually a joint affair called Gramercy, and Universal funded half of it, and Polygram Filmed Entertainment funded the other half. And so Gramercy, this division of Universal, put out like The Usual Suspects. They put out Mallrats. They put out Barbed Wire. They put out Days of Confused, Mystery Science Theater 3000. So this was a smaller division. Like that's why the budget was what it was and whatnot. So when the movie like comes out, and you know, we ultimately wound up making $2 million. Like I was so green that I was like, do I owe Universal $3 million? Like I called up my agent and was like, I didn't even get paid that. They paid me $50,000 to make this movie. I don't have $3 million to pay them back. And she was like, you don't. But, you know, I was like, so, you know, and then my first reaction was, well, then if I don't have to pay the money back, why is a movie not doing well a big deal to any director? And she was like, because they're going to stop calling you. And they did. So all talk of like, you know, on the set of Mallrats, Jim had brought up Mallrats 2. Like at one point, he goes, I think this movie's going to do really well. You better have a sequel ready. And I was like, a sequel? Seriously? He goes, yeah. What would you do if the studio was like, we want to greenlight a sequel right now? I said, I would do Mallrats 2 Die Hard in a Mall. Because at that time, 1995, they were doing like Die Hard knockoffs and stuff. Die Hard in a train, Die Hard on a plane, so forth and so on. So I was like, Die Hard, but in a mall. Brody becomes like John McClane. And so when we had our first test screening of the movie, Tom Pollock, the head of Universal, who had been Spielberg's lawyer or George Lucas's lawyer, both of their lawyer and stuff, maybe Landis's lawyer too, because I think he was there for the Animal House test screening, because he invoked it at our test screening for Mallrats. He was like, that audience loved that movie. He was like, it was incredible. Now, the test screening, to be fair, took place at the San Diego Comic-Con in 1995 at Horton Plaza, where the movie theater, the multiplex used to be. So the audience was made up of Comic-Con people and comic book professionals. So Tom Pollock heard that audience reacting to Mallrats, and he goes, this is Animal House level reaction. He was going, this is what we heard in the room on Animal House. And that movie did incredibly well. This movie's going to make $100 million. And I was like, whoa, my God, man. Like Pulp Fiction had just broken through the year before with $100 million. you know, and it's a movie that nobody prior to that ever would have said would do well at the box office. It's too idiosyncratic. It's too auteur driven and stuff. And yet there it was, broke the century figure. So Tom Pollock being like, this is going to do Animal House business, man. The guy who was there for Animal House, the guy that ran the studio, like, I believed it. Now he was off by 98 million bucks. So it was kind of a letdown, kind of a downer. And that all that discussion about potential Mallrats 2, the discussion about doing Chasing Amy as a high school movie, like, withered instantly. And me and Jim Jacks would talk every day. It went from every day to every couple days, because when something fails, like when you have a movie, I mean, I can't speak to like when something fails in general, but I could speak specifically to when you have a movie that fails. I was raised Catholic, so pardon the analogy. In the Bible, like, they talk about, you know, the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is praying, you know, please let this cup pass me by. I don't want to be, you know, sacrificed and stuff. And the apostles keep falling asleep and shit. And he's like, can't you stay awake for one night and whatnot? Soon as Jesus gets arrested, the apostles fucking scatter, you know. And then Peter, you know, who's like his boy throughout the whole fucking Bible, is suddenly like, Jesus who? I don't know that guy, you know, and then cock crows and stuff. So when a movie flops, it's exactly like that. Like, suddenly nobody knows anybody else. Like, all the good times and the camaraderie that you built dissipates instantly. And Ben Affleck had said words afterwards when the movie tanked. He goes, I knew the movie wasn't going to do good because we had too much fun making the movie. And he's going, in my experience, when you enjoy making the movie doesn't do well. And I was like, that's a really sick thought. And he's going, I've been around the business, man. And he's going, what can I tell you? Like, read your history. People fight on a movie, somehow it turns out better. He's going, but everyone gets along on a movie like on Mallrats. Makes a good movie, but nobody goes and sees it. And, you know, that's real specious thinking and stuff. That's like going like, well, if you'd had a tiger in the movie, it probably would have made $100 million. But regardless, like, at least he had a take on it. The other guy who had a take on our failure was Jim Jacks. And, you know, he was in many ways the co-pilot of Mallrats. Like, as I wrote it scene by scene, I would print it up and then fax the pages to Jim. He was the guy that, you know, he instigated Mallrats. I met him at Sundance the same night that we won the filmmaker trophy for Clerks. So there was an after party. John Pearson, who wrote Spike, Mike, Slackers, and Dykes, he was the producer's rep on Clerks. He goes, I want to introduce you to the guy who made Rick's movie, Dazed and Confused. This is Jim Jacks. I said, I don't know him, but I know him. I said, I know the work, man. Like, I saw your name on Raising Arizona. He's like, that's right. I was the one that found the Coen brothers. I found Blood Simple. He discovered Blood Simple, brought it to the Circle Theater. They became Circle Films. It did well. Then they were like, let's make another movie. That was Raising Arizona. Jim got to be a producer. So I know who you are. Dazed, Confused, Tombstone, Tremors, Raising Arizona. Like, yeah, I've seen your name, man. I like the stuff you do. And he goes, well, I liked Clerks very much. I wanted to buy it. I'm mad that Miramax beat me to it. And I was like, really? And he's going, yeah, I was going to buy it and we'd do a Universal remake of the movie. And I was like, get out of here. He's like, yeah, it'd be in color. And I'd let you keep 75% of what you had. And I was like, what's the other 25%? And he goes, nobody fucks a dead guy in a Universal movie. And so I was like, well, I'm glad Miramax bought the movie then. And he's going, you got anything else? What do you want to do next? And I said, well, I love Universal, so I'd love to work there. Some of my favorite movies, man, Breakfast Club, Blues Brothers, Animal House, Jaws, made right at Universal. So it'd be a dream to work at Universal. He's like, well, we're set up at Universal. You got any ideas? And I go, Mallrats. And he goes, what's that? And I said, it's Clerks, but in a mall. And he goes, oh, that's good. He's going, you save that. Save that for me and Universal. And I was like, what do you mean save it? And he's going, well, Miramax bought your movie and Miramax is owned by Disney. So that means Disney's going to fly you out to meet with Touchstone and Hollywood Pictures, what they do with all you Sundance kids. So when you go meet with them, since they're flying you out, give them ideas, but you save that Mallrats and you bring it to Universal and we go pitch it at the Black Tower. And I was like, is that okay? Am I allowed to do that? And he goes, fuck Disney. They got so much money. Come to Universal. He's going, you like our movies. And I was like, all right. So I stayed in touch with Jim like once I went back home, he would call and be like, you know, you gonna come out? When are you making your trip? And they scheduled the trip as he predicted. It was in March. And he goes, okay, when you come out, don't say Mallrats to anybody but them and stuff. So we went and pitched Mallrats with Jim, me and Scott, and our friend Bob Hawk came with us. It was Bob's like 50th birthday, and we had taken him to Disneyland for the day. He'd never been to Disneyland and stuff. Bob Hawk was the guy that discovered Clerks. So we take him to Disneyland, and we get like an early phone, cell phone, big ass brick cell phone call from my agent going like, the Universal wants to hear this pitch today. So we come racing back, and we bring Bob to the pitch with us, which Bob was like, what a great birthday. I went to Disneyland, and I got to see inside a corporate empire and stuff. So he was an indie film guy. He worked on The Times of Harvey Milk, won Academy Award, that movie did and stuff. So him seeing inside Universal was like, you know, curious to an indie film guy like him. We went in and pitched to Casey Silver, Nina Jacobson. Casey Silver was the head of the studio at that point. The head of creative. Tom Pollock was like the head and stuff. So they went for it, and you know, we didn't find out in the room. They weren't like sold. Jim called me like, because we were staying at Bob Hawk's that night, and he was like, they like it, man. They're into it. So I think this is gonna happen. So he was my co-pilot the whole time. I'd feed him pages. He would be like, you know, this is funny. You don't need this. How about more of this? Blah, blah, blah. When I handed him the script with the written pages for what became the Stan Lee scene, which did not begin as a Stan Lee scene. It was meant for a comic book guru, like just a random, like some made up character and stuff. And I believe his name was Frank Lee, like Frank Miller's Stan Lee or something like that. So Jim goes, who's this comic book guy meant to be? He goes, I like this scene. It reminds me of American Graffiti when Dickie Dreyfuss runs into Wolfman Jack. He's going, but, you know, Wolfman Jack was a real guy. Who's this comic book guy supposed to be? And I said, well, you know, he's just made up. I guess if he was anybody, he'd be like a Stan Lee or something. And Jim's like, well, why don't you just write it for Stan Lee? And I was like, well, I don't know Stan Lee. And he goes, well, I do. And I was like, oh, Hollywood is good. These fuckers know each other. So he was like, rewrite the scene for Stan. I meet with Stan once a month at Dan Tana's for dinner, man, because I've just been a big fan my whole life. So I'll slip him the pages. We'll talk about it. We'll see if he wants to be in the movie. We're always trying to find something to do together and stuff. So I rewrote it for Stan. Jim brought the pages to Stan, and Jim called me at night. It was like midnight my time, 9 o'clock his time, because he was in Los Angeles. I was in New Jersey. And he goes, Stan Lee wants to talk to you. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, he wants to talk to you. And I said, what did he say about the scene? He goes, well, you talk to him. And I said, did he read the scene? He goes, he did. And I said, what did he say? And he goes, you don't want to know. And I said, tell me. And he goes, well, first thing he said after he read it was, Jim, I would never say any of this shit in real life. And I had to explain to him that he wasn't playing himself. He was playing a version of himself and whatnot. And then he said he wanted to talk to you. And so you got to call him tomorrow. So I called him at the appointed time, and, you know, they were like, hold for Stan Lee. And he was like, hi, this is Stan Lee. And I was like, I know who you are. I was, oh my God, I've been reading your work forever. I knew your voice even before I heard your voice in Spider-Man Is Amazing Friends, man, just from reading you in the bullpen and stuff. Like, you are the master. And he's like, well, thank you. And he's going, it's very nice that you want to put me in your movie. I said, I'm excited that you're even thinking about it and stuff. He goes, well, let's talk about that. He goes, in the movie, you have me doing a wonderful speech to this kid about the girl in my life that got away. And he's going, I love it, and I love where it plays, and it's funny because it references the comic books. He's going, but the problem is, if I go into your movie playing myself, talking about the girl that got away, the girl who I got at home is going to lock the door and kick me out of the house. He's going, I can't offend Joni. Like, I can't have anyone thinking that there was somebody before Joni. It was always Joni. So, you know, what I'm suggesting is, if you could deal with it, like, maybe we do one more scene where it's revealed that I was only saying those things to help the kid, that it wasn't real serious. That way, you know, Joni could keep her pride. And it was so adorable. Like, where, you know, like, he cared about the honor of his wife in this dippy cameo in this kid's movie and stuff like that. And I remember it was one of the first things that endeared me to him as a human being, not just as an icon, but like, oh man, that's really sweet. But then knowing him as long as I did, because, you know, we became friends from Mallrats forward and stuff like that. He went from being like Stan Lee to being like, hey, it's Stan. Knowing Stan as I came to know him, it was like twofold. It was very clever. Number one, on the surface, there's the story about, like, I don't want to offend Joni, which I absolutely believe is true. But what I didn't hear was the soft pitch of like, maybe we add another scene where I do something else. And that's how he got 2 scenes or out of that one scene in Mallrats, man. Like he was strategic and clever like that. It was kind of funny. I figured it out late in life. So Jim Jacks was the doorway to Stan. Jim Jacks was like my co-pilot. Me and Scott and Jim, we stayed at Jim's house up on Mulholland Drive while we were casting the movie, while we were cutting the movie. And we didn't cut it. Paul Dixon, the editor, cut it and stuff. But we stayed with Jim rather than stay in a hotel and stuff like that. I think he liked being around us because we were in our 20s and he was like in his 40s, but he did the same shit we did. He went to every single movie that came out on a Friday. He went and bought laser discs, like everything. He was like the old pro who taught us how to be professionals in the movie business. Like he would go out and buy every laser disc that ever came out every Tuesday and shit. And, you know, one time I was like, Jim, why are you buying Joanna Man? You're never going to watch Joanna Man. And he goes, I buy every movie that comes out because the movie business is how I make my money. Without the movie business, I don't have money to spend. And he's like, I ain't got a wife. I don't got kids. So I put my money from the movie business back into the movie business. I buy other people's movies. Like I hope they're buying my movies. I'm buying Joanna Man. I hope somebody's buying Tombstone. That's how we keep this thing going. I believe in the movie business. He was a true believer when it came to film and stuff like that. Really craved a $100 million grosser, and then finally got it with like the Mummy movies and stuff like that. So Jim, on the day, you know, that he calls us up, Saturday morning, the Friday night we open, Saturday he's going to call and give us the grosses. And I knew the writing was not exactly on the wall, but I remember flying out to Los Angeles for the premiere that we had up at City Walk, like the weekend before the movie opened, or the week before the movie opened. And the movie's going to open on Friday. I think the premiere was like on a Wednesday or something. So I fly out on Tuesday. And when I land, I'm driving to, I was living with Joey Adams at that point. So I'm driving to Joey's apartment, and K-Rock, you know, they're doing the radio station, doing a little talk up between songs. And the DJ was like, what's everyone doing this weekend, man? I just saw a movie called Mallrats last night. Ugh, don't go see that. Terrible. And then like, and now on with the countdown. And I was like, what? Like, what? What? How strange. How weird that I heard that on a radio in a car on my moment I got to Los Angeles. Must be nothing. Then after the premiere, flew back to Jersey and was in Jersey for the opening night, the night that the movie opened, Friday night and shit. So we're coming home from the airport, me, Jay, Scott. And I say to the driver, can you stop at the Hazlitt multiplex? You know, it's our big multiplex in Hazlitt on the highway and stuff. I know that Mallrats is playing there and stuff because when, you know, Universal booked the theaters, I was like, where's it playing in Monmouth County? So that's my hometown theater, more or less. I can't wait to go watch the movie with the hometown crowd. There's going to be people from high school that I went to high school with, grammar school, probably in the audience, right? So I'm like, can you stop here? And dude brings us to the theater and stuff. And I go in and, you know, it's like you flex, you know, the flex I had at age 25, 1995, walking into the Hazlitt multiplex was like, hey, I'm the director of Mallrats. I'm just going to go see how it's playing. I don't need a ticket, you know, that kind of shit. And the kid behind the counter was like, do what? Like, as if you could do that in Los Angeles because there's the movie business world. But I was doing it in suburban New Jersey going like, it's cool. Just you kick back. I'm going to go check out how my movie's selling, you know? And so I marched to the movie theater that it's playing in because it's a multiplex, open the doors and stuff, go in, and it's Friday night, 7:30 show. So prime time. This is the one that's going to be packed. And it was half full. And I was like, huh. So I watched for a while and the reaction was good, but the half full really kind of bugged me. And so as I left, I asked the kid, I was like, is it playing in another theater? And he goes, no, just this one. And I was like, huh. All right. So I started getting worried where I'm like, you know, this is our hometown and this theater's not even packed. So the next morning, Jim Jacks calls up to give us the box office grosses. And it's Saturday morning. You know, you couldn't go online or anything like that. You had to wait for some firm to be like, here it is. Here's the estimate based on the grosses that were called in from all the movie theaters across the country. And that happens until about, you know, midnight on 1 o'clock on the West Coast. So by the time they aggregated all that information, 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, you were presented with a rough estimate of how much your movie made. That's how they did the grosses back then. I don't know how they do it now. So Jim calls us up 8 o'clock his time, 11 o'clock New Jersey time. And he's like, I got the grosses. And he don't sound, you know, like he's celebrating. And you could always tell when Jim was in a good mood, and he was not in a good mood. So I said, what were they? What'd we do? And he goes, we made $400,000. And I was like, on what screen? And he goes, that was all the screens. I was hoping it was like one New York screen. I was like, woohoo, 400K in New York, man. Fuck New Jersey. Instead, it was 400K nationwide for Friday night. And I was like, 400K? I was like, are we going to even hit 1 million? He's gone, fingers crossed. Hopefully we hit 1 million this weekend. I was like, what happens now? And he goes, it's over. It's done. I was like, what? He's going, yeah, they're going to pull it from the theaters by Thursday. We're going to lose screens, probably go to dollar houses. And I was like, well, I mean, isn't there something we can do for Monday, Tuesday? He's going, you go to the movies all the time. Do you ever hear of a movie going up on a Monday, Tuesday? Especially because the director went out there and asked people to watch it. It's gone, and it didn't go. We missed. And I was like, you know, the bottom of my world dropped out, man. Like, you got to realize up until that moment in time, Clerks, I was completely overpraised and called like a boy wonderkind, and fucking, I wasn't flavor of the month. They gave me a whole year with that motherfucker, man. So like, I was special, and suddenly I was not special anymore. Suddenly I was like sophomore slump Kev, like total fucking sophomore jinx. So Jim could sense that I was like what? Like that I was sounding a bit like despondent. And so Jim goes, listen, he's going, they're going to say a bunch of things in the trades and whatnot. He's going, you need to remember, we weren't wrong when we made this movie. We were early, but we weren't wrong. And I was like, early? What do you mean? He's going, you watch. This movie's going to find its audience. I guarantee it. He's going, but we weren't wrong to do this. We were early. And the way he said it, it was like somebody who had dealt with this sort of thing before. And he had. Like, Dazed and Confused came out right before us, and that too, like, had kind of imploded. But they had way more, you know, way better reviews than we ever had. But like, it was a Gramercy movie aimed at a specific audience with a director who was picked out of Sundance, and his second film was with Gramercy. I was following the same path, and both of us had under-delivered. So at that point, a lot of people would write about, like, you know, this is what happens when you give Sundance kids money. Like, back then, for me to go from Clerks to like Mallrats from $27,575 budget to a $5 million budget, like, seemed like what a jump. But think about today's Sundance kids, you know, like my man who directed Cop Car, his very next movie, they're like, and here is Spider-Man. You know, that's a jump from a couple million to hundreds of millions of dollars. So in my day and age, they didn't do that. Thank God. Imagine if somebody had given me a comic book movie. They let me write one, but if they had given me one, I couldn't have done it. Like, I didn't have I'm still not a visual stylist. Like, that's up to the task of making a comic book movie. I can make a pretty decent Kevin Smith movie, and even sometimes I'm off on that. But like, making a comic book movie, it was always in my blood to have my characters talking about this shit, but not in my blood to actually try to make one of those. Like, it's more appealing. Like, even now, late in my career, if I lobbied for it, I guarantee you I can get a comic book movie. At one point I had one. They were like, hey man, remake Toxic Avenger. And I was like, like, especially because they were like, remake it for $25 million. And I'm like, the charm of Toxic Avenger is that it cost $1.05. Yeah. That was asking me to remake Clerks for like $25 million. So I always kind of fall out, you know, ethically with the idea and stuff. Like, and I always arrive back at the same conclusion where I'm like, I'd be too bored making one of those movies. Like, even when I make a direct to CW show, those are only like 9-day shoots. And by day 6, I'm like, we're still doing this shit? We're not done yet? Because in my world, when characters talk, like, talk is cheap. And you can roll, like, get 7 pages of dialogue shot in a day if it's just characters talking to each other. That's the kind of shit I like to do. If you're making a comic book movie, you'd be lucky to get 7 seconds in a day if you're doing a gigantic fuck-off action sequence. And a lot of those movies have to be that. And I'm not that guy. Like, I'd rather watch those movies than ever make that movie. So, like, even now at this point in my career, like, I'm way more interested in sequelizing Mallrats, doing a movie about people that talk about comic book movies rather than making a comic book movie. And I wonder sometimes if Mallrats had been successful, would my mindset be different? If I had been rewarded for Mallrats, like I was rewarded for Clerks, would I have then pursued that type of filmmaking, more antic, more studio driven? Or was it because I was praised on Clerks and rewarded on Clerks, but then punished on Mallrats, that I quickly went back to the model of reward, which was low budget, stay in my lane. What am I doing over at a studio? Fuck studios, fuck Hollywood. I'm independent and shit like that. I don't know. I don't know. Like here, closest I could point to would be when we brought the script, me and Mosier brought the script for Good Will Hunting into Miramax. Once they bought it, because it had been set up at Castle Rock and it had sold to Castle Rock for like $800,000. So getting it to sell at Miramax or have Miramax pick it up, it was going to be more with turnaround costs. Like Miramax had to pay $1 million for a screenplay, and they never did shit like that. I don't even think when they picked Quentin's movie, Pulp Fiction, out of turnaround from Columbia TriStar, I don't think they paid that much for the script. So, you know, it was a real crapshoot that they were ever going to pick up that script, but the script was so good, they went for it and picked it up. So Ben, Matt, John Gordon, who is our exec at Miramax, and I hate to throw this name in, but the chairman of Miramax, let's just leave his name out of it. All of them were like, Kevin, do you want to direct the movie? So I was given Good Will Hunting to direct. Like they were like, you can do it, man. You brought the script in, you know the boys. And instantly, without even thinking about it, I was like, oh God, no. Let the boys go with their first choice. Like the boys always wanted to go with Gus Van Sant. Castle Rock had been pitching them other directors. And Harvey had them meet with other directors, like Mel Gibson met with Ben and Matt to direct Good Will Hunting. Michael Mann shot like 10 minutes of test screen footage with Ben and Matt, picked a scene and shot it. So there were people like heavy hitters that wanted to direct the movie, but I knew the boys, and I knew the boys wanted Gus Van Sant because Casey had worked with Gus on To Die For, and Ben and Matt were Gus fanboys. Who wasn't? Gus made wonderful movies. So when they came to me and they were like, you could do this, the boys were very sweet. They said it too. They were like, Kev, you brought it in. Like, we know how good Chasing Amy is. Like, you could totally pull this off. And I was like, I honestly, no, I think you should get Gus to do it. Because if I'm directing this movie, the whole time I'm just going to turn around to you guys and say, what did you see when you wrote this scene? Because I was such a writer-driven director. Like, my respect for the director stemmed from whether or not the director was the writer of the material as well. And the writer to me is always paramount. Like, I say that as a fucking director, somebody who's identified in the lower third always as director Kevin Smith. But like, I've always felt like a writer first and foremost and stuff. So their script was clearly a product of two wonderful writers. And my first notion was, why don't you guys direct it? But Miramax is like, we're not letting the lunatics run the asylum. They're the leads. Let them do that. So, I was like, well, then Gus, they want Gus to do it. Like Gus should do it and stuff. And eventually Gus definitely got the job. So I never that was I'm not going to say I would have made the same exact movie as Gus, because like I said to the boys the whole time, I would have been like, well, what did you see when you wrote this scene? All right, let's just shoot that. Let's do what the boys said we should do. At that point, they should be the fucking directors as far as I was concerned. So it was easy to pass it up. And even when the movie became what it became and made $100 million, I was never like, ooh, I was just like, it was never going to be that under my stewardship. I'll tell you that much. Like it wouldn't have been the movie that it became. It would have been the movie that Ben and Matt would have quasi directed, which might have been just as good. But, fucking Gus Van Sant brought magic to that movie. A remove from it. We were all so close to the script, and we were all like, man, like I loved that script. I've read it on a toilet, didn't get up, and wept for 2 hours. Like at the end, I was like, oh my God. So I loved the script. I was super close to it, man. Gus, he really dug the script, but Gus was completely removed from it enough to make this wonderful movie. So given the chance later on to become better, I guess, than a Kevin Smith filmmaker, like I always deferred to being Kevin Smith. And I say it in Q&As, and I always I describe it thusly in the most charming way I try to be. I say there are millions of people, talented people they got out there lining up to make them comic book movies, man. And they're all gifted and they know what they're doing and stuff. Way more visionary than me. There's only one person had any interest in directing a Kevin Smith movie, and that's Kevin Smith. And if I don't do it, then it just doesn't happen. Now, a lot of people will be like, good, stop letting it happen. But, I'm not, I keep my budgets low. I don't hurt anybody and stuff. I stay on the fringes now. I'm not so much in anybody's face. I'm just trying to maintain, the moment I hit year 25 in this career, I was like, holy fuck, man. There's a chance I could do this right to the grave. I mean, I almost died 2.5 years ago, so there was a real good chance that I was going to be a filmmaker right to the fucking grave. So the longer I'm in it, the more I'm now I just want to disappear into the fucking framework. I don't want to fucking anybody being like, hey, there he is, get him out of the room. I just want to be like a fucking painting on the wall that people are like, oh, it's been there for fucking years. I want to be Nicholson in The Shining, where if they look real close at the one picture, they're like, he's been here since the 20s and shit like that. So I like having this job. I like being in pop culture. I like being an entertainer. I love making films and stuff. But I'll be honest with you, I still only make films. And here's how I know that the path was always going to be the path. That ultimately, even if Mallrats had been successful, I'd still probably have the career that I have now. I'm not as committed to being a filmmaker as I was at the beginning of this journey. When I started this journey, that was all I could conceive of being a filmmaker. Just oh my God, I want to make films. I'll be a filmmaker. I'll be a director. I'm going to be serious, considered a serious artist and stuff like that. And I did that. I got to make a film and people treated me seriously a few times, way more times than I deserve to be treated seriously and stuff. It's particularly as an outsider artist. So, I've done it many times at this point. How many movies have I made now? 13 maybe? I think Jay and Silent Bob reboot might have been the 13th. I'm bad at math, so we can figure it out later. But, it's not like it's diminishing returns, but once you've done it a bunch of times, that's your dream coming true, literally time and time again. And I was an author of my dream coming true. It wasn't like I fucking rubbed the lottery ticket and fucking everything came true. I worked toward it. I was like, I want to make a film and nobody could stop me. So I'm going to fucking do it. And I don't care if people don't like it. I just want to see it. I want to see if I could do it. I watch other people's movies. I want to try to do this shit. That kid and his gumption and his unfounded fucking belief in himself, after, having grown up watching movies and then seeing one movie so profoundly powerful that it made him think he too could be a filmmaker. And that movie was Richard Linklater's Slacker. Once that happened and stuff, that's that kid's dream coming true over and over and over again. That kid put me on this path. I'm not that kid anymore, sadly, and happily. Because I've grown up and had a life and other things have happened to me and stuff like that. But that fucking idiot kid that as an adult, I would be tempted to, urge caution. Why do you think you could do this? And I know it works out for this fucking kid. But even if I could go back, would be like, why do you think that this is possible? But thank God he did. Because even now, he confounds me. He gave me this life that I fucking love, man. Where I not only do I get to make movies and shit, but I get to talk about movies and people are like, he's got a point. As if I fucking matter and shit. So that one little decision that kid made, when he saw Slacker and was like, hey, this is what I want to do, shaped the rest of my life. And I got to step into this wonderful existence. I enjoy being me, obviously. So I always thank that kid. I have that kid to thank. And that's why I keep making films. If it were for me, if it were up to this Kevin Smith, I'd be like, yeah, I've done it. And when it occurs to me to do it again, maybe I'll do it again. But I'm in no hurry because I've found so many other platforms by which to be a storyteller, podcasting being my favorite. Now, I don't have to create a fake narrative and hire people to make pretend characters. I can literally just talk about me and my friends because that's what I was always doing, but just changing names around and stuff. So as a storyteller, I have so many other platforms. Shit, I can just put up a really good Instagram post and fucking tell a story. I have so many other platforms that satisfy the urge of connectivity, of self-expression. And film is a complicated one and expensive, tough to pull off. If it wasn't, everyone would fucking do it. Requires a commitment and a belief in self beyond normal reason, an unreasonable or a reasonable amount of unreasonability in order to move forward and shit like that. So like that was not really a part of my character makeup. And yet that kid fucking put me on the journey. So I make films now, not because I'm burning with stories to tell. I make them for the kid who started this journey because that's what he fucking dreamed about. That motherfucker dreamed of this existence. Like, are you kidding me? It was beyond his ability to dream this big. That, like, you know, Clerks was fucking too big for him to dream, and yet somehow he dreamed it and pulled it off. But I remember that kid when he was making fucking Clerks going like, wouldn't it be great if like Jay and Silent Bob became like Cheech and Chong and they were in a bunch of movies? And they fucking did. Like, that's mind-bending to me. Like, I watched that kid's dreams fucking come true left and right. And now I live his dream life where people treat him seriously, where the, you know, fucking the government, you know, which, you know, take it for what you will, but the United States government took Clerks and put it into the Library of fucking Congress. Like, that's nuts. That's batshit insane. I'd love to go back in time and tell that kid, like, keep it up. This Clerks dream of yours, like, you're not wrong. Like, I can't wait to tell you where this fucking shit brings us and whatnot. I mean, that kid, like, before that kid existed, before the Kevin Smith who wanted to make movies and Clerks and shit existed, he was just a kid who loved movies and Hollywood and shit like that. He didn't have an internet to access it, but he'd watch every program he could on the 3 channels they had until cable came along and stuff. So in 1979, my father and my mom take me, my brother and sister on a cross-country vacation on a train because that's all we could afford. The old man worked for the post office. So we were lower middle class income family. And with 3 kids, that puts you on the poverty line. So, but my father hated working at the post office and demanded to go on vacations with his family so he could see the country and see the world. So we all go to California because he's like, the fat one likes Hollywood. Let's go see Hollywood. You know, nowadays he'd be like, you know, jump on the internet and fucking Google it and shit. But back then we couldn't do that. Nowadays he'd say nothing. He's fucking dead. But nowadays you could look up Hollywood. Back then, if you wanted to like engage with Hollywood, you actually had to go to it. So we got on an Amtrak train, went cross country and shit. And we went to Grauman's Chinese Theater, which is literally down the street from where I live. I could walk to it in 5 minutes or less. Very brisk pace. Let's say 10 minutes. It's about a 10-minute walk from my house. So we go to Grauman's Chinese Theater, which for those, if they don't follow this kind of nonsense, that's where famous people put their handprints in the cement and their feet in the fucking cement and shit like that. And I wanted to go because I knew about it because it was Hollywood, but also because R2-D2 and C-3PO and Darth Vader had just put their footprints into the cement. So there was somebody I fucking cared about in the cement, man. Never mind Clark Gable and fucking Myrna Loy and all these old people. Like fucking R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth fucking Vader. So we go and we, like, I got a picture. I put it up on Instagram a few times. Me and my brother kneeling and smiling, fucking crew cuts and bad clothing from the 70s in front of the footprints and shit. And that day, my father took me around and was like, oh, this is Jimmy Durante. He put his nose in the cement, you know, and look, there's this guy. And then he's showing off all the old timer stars that I didn't know about, educating a young Hollywood fan on old Hollywood, then old Hollywood, what is now considered classic Hollywood. And the last thing he says to me, I swear to God this is true, before we leave Grauman's Chinese Theater in 1979, was some shit that you just say to a fucking kid that likes movies. The same way that some kid likes cricket. You're like, ah, maybe you'll be on the pitch one day, or whatever the fuck they call cricket pitch. Or if they like football, like, oh, maybe you're going to play in the Super Bowl one day or something like that. Like, you know, just some shit you say to a kid. And my old man goes, maybe you'll be here one day. And with no expectation that his idiot fat son would ever be there one day. It was just a nice thing to say to his idiot fat son in 1979. However, 40 years later, me and Jay were in the courtyard of Grauman's Chinese Theater putting our footprints and our handprints into the cement. That came because of that brave little Kevin Smith kid who was like, maybe I can make a movie like Richard Linklater. None of this happens unless that kid makes the decision. So even if, like, in my soul, I hated filmmaking, you know, where I was like, it's a sham, a fucking fraud. I've gotten to the center of it and there's nothing, kids. Run from it. Like, even if I treated it the way I treat, like, my Catholicism. I was raised in a faith and now I don't have that faith anymore. At one point I hit a wall where I was like, oh, none of this shit makes sense anymore, does it? Oh, I guess I'm an adult now. If I'd had that come to Jesus or run from Jesus moment with film, I would still make film today for that fucking kid because that's all he dreamed about. And he gave me all of this shit. He gave me the ability to talk to people in England about a fucking 25-year-old celebratory fucking release, yet another release of a movie that he made a quarter of a century ago. That kid, like, if I could have written my dream life, it would be what I'm living, and he provided it. So the least I could fucking do is just honor the journey he started. And he started as a filmmaker. He didn't realize it would get bigger than that. And like, look, I love being a filmmaker, don't get me wrong, but like, it's gone way beyond that, man. Like, fucking, I can do podcasts. I've had a TV show. I fucking stand on stages, became a stand-up comic. Like, I've diversified the portfolio and worn a lot of different hats and coats and stuff that, you know, kind of make directing pale in comparison, and also make it seem time consuming and costly and too much of a gamble and a crapshoot. So logic would dictate that I get to a certain age and I'm like, filmmaking's for the young. Quentin said that to me at one point. Quentin Tarantino himself said, directing is a young man's game. And he's going, and I'm getting out of it by the time I'm old. And I was like, why? And he was like, because you got to have the passion. You got to have the brio of youth to be a filmmaker. And I remember at the time being like, I don't know, Quentin. And, you know, now he shows no sign of it. He keeps talking about 10 and done, but I don't know about that. But still, he takes his time between the flicks anyway. But now I'm actually starting to understand, like, what he meant. Like, I look at the breathtaking work that's being done today and I go, like, I can't do that. That would never fucking occur to me. Are you kidding me? I watched, what did I just watch? I watched a movie called The Kid Detective. And Adam Brody's in it. It comes out this week or something like that. Thought it was so classy, so well made, so original. I was like, I would never think to do that. I'm watching Lovecraft Country on HBO. Every episode takes my breath away. The storytelling, not just the visuals, not just how cool it is, but the fucking storytelling that they're doing on a per episode basis while still stringing it together with the mythology. Breathtaking. Makes a guy like me go, I can't do that. Like, why do I even bother? Like, I can't, like, they got good people doing this shit now. Like, maybe I should just push back from the table. But young Kevin Smith, 21-year-old Kevin Smith, you know, is still owed. So I keep going at it. And last time it worked out real well. Jay and Silent Bob reboot was wonderful. Oh my God, 2019 was like the best year of my fucking life. You know, Yoga Hosers, 2016, not nearly the same journey. So there's some times where you make the journey and you just get kicked in the balls for it. Mallrats was that for the first 10 years of its fucking life. From 1995 till about 2005-ish. They started kicking Jersey Girl instead in around 2005. And so, you know, and I noticed the shift where people be like, oh, I love Mallrats. You know, where I'd be like, Mallrats was my go-to joke. Like, well, don't listen to me. That's not COVID. That's weed. Don't listen to me. I made Mallrats, you know, and people are like, ha, 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 ha. That joke played for a good 5-6 years. Then about 7 years after the movie came out, people started pushing back on the joke, being like, well, hey, I like that movie. That movie's good. A common refrain I would get in my world, geek world, in the comic book community was, that movie's good. It's got Stan in it. That movie has all that artwork. That movie's got me in it. That Brody character is amazing. The movie slowly found its audience on home video, on cable and stuff like that. So much so that the only person who remembered that it failed was the filmmaker. Filmmaker carries the cross like herpes throughout the rest of their fucking life if a movie fails. You know, just like if a movie succeeds, believe me, they wear that proudly like a hickey. But if it fails, they carry that shit like herpes and whatnot. So I was so used to kicking this movie. I used to step on this movie to gain credibility for the next movie. I would dismiss Mallrats as like, it was just a $5 million casting call for Chasing Amy, because that's where my Chasing Amy cast had come from. Ben, Joey, and Jason were all in Mallrats and stuff. And it was an easy diss to gain credibility back in the world that accepted me, that, you know, appreciated me, the world of indie film. So I'm standing at the Indie Film Spirit Awards in 1996 next to Laura Dern. And before we do our presentation, I'm like, you know, to a room full of my indie film peers, I'm like, hey, before we go a step further, I just want to take this opportunity to apologize for Mallrats. And then they all start laughing. I was like, I don't know what I was thinking. In any event, and then we went into the fucking reading of the shit. So for me, it was always like a apple box in our world, a stepping stool, if you will, to get to something better. Like I quickly, and that's where I realized my integrity when it comes to my storytelling was not as strong. Like, and it's still a fight that I maintain to this day. Yoga Hosers was the first flop that I actually was able to sustain, to kind of stand in the face of, because it took me this long to learn this very simple lesson. When Mallrats happened, I was just shocked and sad and like, oh no, fucking, what do I do and shit. What I've learned to do since then, coping mechanisms, and it's not just for when a movie fails, it's good for many things in life, even the very successful things, the ventures that work out. Two things that I always say when a project, you know, tanks, and I say it when it succeeds, but it comes in more handy when it fails. First thing I say is, you wanted this. Oh my God, remember how bad you wanted this? Like, you made people rearrange the universe for this to happen. You asked for millions of dollars for this to happen and told people to join you in a different state for a month of their lives to go pretend to be something else. And you wanted this. So don't act like this was something bad. You wanted it, you got it. You just forgot to ask for a successful outcome. So that's on you. But don't sell out on this shit now. You wanted this. Stand by it. And then the second thing that I always say to myself is, what was the alternative? Like, what were you going to do if you didn't do that thing? It would have eaten at your soul like a fucking cancer, because you know you could do it, but you didn't do it because for reasons. Like, it wasn't beyond your capability, like fucking launching a rocket into fucking space. And even that is somewhat doable if you know the right people. This is making a movie, and you've done that before, and you've done it again and again. For you to not have made this movie, it would have eaten at your fucking soul, and you would have spent the rest of your life going, what would have happened if we did it? So what was the alternative? And at that point, then you're like, you're right. I'm, you know, and then you start dealing with the aftermath or with the fallout. But I didn't have those coping technologies or skills in 1995. Instead, all I had was the fucking Hail Mary pivot, you know, which was like, oh my God, they hated our studio movie. Like, let's make an indie film quick. So Chasing Amy, as much as it's like, you know, the movie that saved my career, and now it has, you know, mixed reception, because I don't know that parts of it have aged very well. But that movie was like a Hail Mary. That was us going, well, me particularly going like, I don't want to get kicked out of the movie business, man. So let's try to make something really good. Let's show them that we know how to make something good that we just chose not to with Mallrats. Like, Mallrats was its own thing. Let's show them that, like, you know, fucking we know what we're doing. It was me trying to save my career. I saw a version of this later on in life, and it validated the feelings I had when we did remember Spaced, Edgar's show?
Yeah.
So they had a screening out here at the ArcLight that, you know, they showed a couple episodes, and then Simon and Edgar, I don't know if Nick was there, but was it Julia? The woman. Yeah. She was there as well. And I moderated the Q&A and stuff like that. And Quentin was there, of course, because Quentin was like the guy who brought like Edgar over. Like, first time I saw Shaun of the Dead was at Quentin's house, like at a screening, like a tastemaker screening before there was such a thing. He just saw a movie he liked, he wanted to show people at his home movie theater. And like Paul Thomas Anderson was there. It was like all the cool kids. And I don't know how I got invited, but we got to see Shaun of the Dead because Quentin was like, look at this fucking shit. This guy's fucking brilliant. And, you know, Edgar made a movie that spoke our language. We were like, oh my God, this is amazing. So Quentin was there when we were doing the Spaced thing at the ArcLight. And afterwards, we got a little cocktail party that they have on the rooftop bar there. It was a bar right next to one of the theaters. You go out, smoke cigarettes and shit. So everybody's sitting around and slapping each other's backs. What a great night, blah, blah, blah. And this is Quentin after, what was the movie that didn't do well? Grindhouse. So this is Quentin after Grindhouse did 25 million, which, I thought was a very cool number, but Quentin, of course, was used to bigger numbers, and he felt that the movie should have made $100 million, and he wasn't wrong, but it didn't get there for whatever reason. At the time, there was a lot of like, hey, the marketing was confused and blah, 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 but we can't relitigate what happened on that. It's just putting it in a place and time. So Quentin feeling a little bit down in the dumps is the point of the story. And I only know this because we're on the rooftop bar after the fucking thing and stuff. And I was like, how was it? Did you like it? He was like, yeah, I liked it. He's like, you did good. And then I said, so what's up? What are you doing now? He goes, I go to Germany tomorrow morning. I said, really? He's going, yeah, I'm going out to Germany. We're going to make the next movie, Inglourious Bastards. I said, right on, man. Look at you going right back to work and stuff. He's like, I gotta show them all that I still know how to fuck. And I was like, oh, I said, well, I saw Grindhouse. You know how to fuck. He goes, yeah, but the box office don't say it. So I'm going to make a kick-ass movie, come back and show him I still know how to fuck. Like, it was a chip on his shoulder. Like, where Grindhouse didn't do as well as it should have in his head. So, he was going to show him with Inglourious Bastards. I never had something like that. You know what I'm saying? I never had a fucking like, ooh. But my Chasing Amy thing was a close parallel. Like, I understood what he meant in terms of like, oh shit, he went right back to work rather than lick his wounds, because he was like, I'm not letting them think for a second that I'm this filmmaker. Which, to be fair, I felt like in the moment he was like, I can't be doing Kevin Smith business. I gotta go do some Tarantino business. I'm glad you thought we did good. So I recognize that moment as like the moment I had after Mallrats, where I was like, oh shit, man, I got to show folks that like Mallrats was a choice, but like I know what I'm doing, and kind of go and do the pivot movie and stuff. Inglourious Bastards, of course, worked out far better for him than Chasing Amy did for us. And I'm not saying it's a 1-to-1 parallel ratio for film Twitter. Please don't fucking kick my ass. I'm relating a similar story. But yeah, I don't know. To answer the very first question, I don't know. I don't know where my career would be today if Mallrats had done well. But I suspect 90% of me feels like we'd be in this exact same place. Except there'd be a couple Mallrats sequels to talk about. But there's going to be one next year, so anything that's meant to happen eventually does happen, I guess.
That is amazing. I think you've basically answered all of our questions in one. I've never been so happy to be silent in my life. Yeah, wonderful. You mentioned the Mallrats sequel that you're kind of prepping for and thinking about. Me and Dan were talking about Reboot earlier. We both love it, and both of our favorite scene is the Ben Affleck scene that kind of brings an ending to the Chasing Amy stuff that you were talking about, but also has the best Batman v Superman joke ever, beautifully delivered.
Which I wonder, I wonder when he made the joke, like Batman was out of his life, but now Batman's back in his life. So I wonder if he's like, damn it.
Yeah, have you talked to Ben about Twilight of the Mallrats, and how do you make a Mallrats movie in a world which is Mallrats? We're all living in a Mallrats world. You say it on the Blu-ray. How do you make that movie in today's world?
What a great question. Have I talked to Ben about it? Short story there, and we'll get back to more of it. Yes, but to answer the meat of the question, I've been trying to make a Mallrats sequel for what, 5-6 years. Like, I announced one years back when Age of Ultron came out, because I was working on this Audi commercial that Stan was in, the Stan Lee Cameo School of Acting. And so me and him and Rooker and Jay were all in the spot together. And so I was like, you know what, man? Like, I'm going to try to make Mallrats 2. Just hold up 2 fingers and we'll take a picture together and stuff. And I started posting pictures of the Mallrats cast, like holding up 2 fingers. So I had written a script, a Mallrats 2 script, that was based on the idea that I pitched Jim Jacks on the set of Mallrats. It came right after Jim Jacks passed away. That's why I started thinking about doing a Mallrats sequel, because I was like, oh man, I never circled back to Jim. Like, you know, Jim didn't need my help. He had a huge career with the Mummy movies and stuff like that. But, you know, we never got back to Mallrats. Like here, Jim Jacks would do this thing where, and I kind of do it today because of him to some degree. This is a note card. You see him around Hollywood all the time and shit like that on executives' desks, studio people's desks. Little vanity cards at the top. They'll say a studio. In this case, it's an old View Askew Productions card. This is from the 90s. And at the bottom, it has your name. And you know, I had the clown inlaid into it and stuff. This is based on the ones that Jim had all over his office and his house from Universal. So he had a bunch of these Universal cards with the globe, and then at the bottom it would say Jim Jacks. And on the card, he would list everything that he was working on and the years that it was taking place. So you'd see a card that said this year, and then be underlined, and then there'd be a bunch of movies that he was actually working on, including there was Mallrats. Then you would see like next year, 1996, and then future projects. So you could see like the movies that were coming based on the cards that he had on his desk. And Jim was a big believer in the Coen brothers since he discovered them and worked with them early on. And so he was like always trying to get, what was it? What was the legal movie they made with George Clooney, and it was a divorce movie?
Intolerable Cruelty?
That was a Coen brothers script that Jim Jacks had for years that they had rewritten for him back before they got even super famous and stuff. So like, you know, his Coen brothers projects, it just said the Coen brothers, CB movie, and then dash and IC. And so later on it became, of course, Intolerable Cruelty. He loved Billy Bob Thornton. So he had a bunch of Billy Bob. He was a big believer in Billy Bob because he met him on Tombstone before Billy Bob had become a writer, director, and stuff. So, you know, he really bonded with him. So he had like, he would always talk about those cats and all the famous people, famous directors, filmmakers he'd come up with. Like, you got to remember, Jim Jacks is the first studio guy to give Sam Raimi a budget. He loves the Evil Dead movies, so he encourages Sam Raimi to make Darkman at Universal and whatnot. And Universal eventually makes Army of Darkness, if I remember correctly, as well. That was because Jim loved fucking Sam Raimi. So he would always tell me and Scott Mosier stories about like Sam, like, oh, when we were doing this, Sam and Sam this and Sam that. And the other two was Billy Bob and the Coens. So he would always be like Billy Bob and the Coens. And me and Scott would always pretend that he was talking about a band, introducing a band, like, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Billy Bob and the Coens. But he was always talking about these projects that he was having in various states of, you know, development. And, you know, these were his dreams. Like, I'm going to get to this. I'm going to get to this. And when it happens, they'll see. You know, he's building his, what would be his slate. And the Mummy was always on it. It was always on one of the lists where you're like, Jim, the Mummy? He's like, that could be great. Imhotep is a scary villain and stuff. So while we're making Mallrats, you know, and he's like, you better have a movie ready and shit. And I was like, Mallrats 2, Die Hard in a Mall. We're in post back in Los Angeles, and one day on Jim's desk, I'm looking at his cards, and there is Mallrats 2, Die Hard on a Mall on the card. You know, and I was like, oh, right on. We made it to the future. Like, Jim wants to be in business with us, like Billy Bob and the Coens. We're going to be like fucking Sam Raimi with this guy and shit. So Mallrats comes out in tanks. And, you know, I go see Jim next time I see Jim, because like I said, you know, when a movie flops, people fucking go flying in other directions and stuff. Jim, it's not like he stopped taking my calls, but we stopped talking regularly, you know, because everyone's licking their wounds and stuff. So I hadn't seen Jim since we made Chasing Amy. So I'm coming back out to Los Angeles. We're done shooting. I got a bag full of VHS dailies of the movie. Like, big bag full of about 30 VHS tapes and stuff. So I go to Jim's to show him the footage and to show him, like, look, man, like it's our kids. It's Ben, it's Joey, it's Jason, like all the kids from Mallrats and stuff like that. And, you know, Jim was like, oh, you know, good for you. You know, as I was showing him the footage, I'd show him like my favorite scenes, but they were all raw, uncut and stuff like that. But he's like, good for you. He's going, smart that you went and made a Miramax movie, you know, and he was happy for you. He's like, Ben's actually good in this and blah, blah, blah. So at one point, Jim goes to use the bathroom. And I'm, you know, bored in his office, and I look at his desk, and his cards are spread out. And mind you, this is like at least a year, if not more, year and change after Mallrats has fucking died. And ain't nobody talking about Mallrats anymore, least of all me and Jim. And I look at the cards, and on future projects, Mallrats 2, Die Hard in the Mall. And there's a fresh card. It's not like he had the old card. He just kept hope alive. Same way that he kept hope alive about that Coen Brothers script, that he was going to get the boys to come back and they were going to do the movie. And I don't know that they did, right? Like, didn't Ron Howard direct it or something like that? Ultimately,
it wasn't them. I don't remember who it was. Yeah,
I think somebody else directed it, but it was a Coen Brothers script. Same way he held on to that kind of like, the boys are going to come back. He felt like we would still do Mallrats 2. Like he said, we weren't wrong. We were just early. So then Jim passed away a couple years back, and untimely. He was jogging on a treadmill and had a massive heart attack. And his assistant went out, get him a breakfast sandwich. Jim was running on the treadmill. She came home. The treadmill was running. Jim was not. He was on the floor, and he just died. Massive heart attack. So I felt like I was going to the funeral. They had it, you know, in Beverly Hills. Was it Beverly Hills? Yeah, Beverly Hills. At this Catholic church in Beverly. No, I'm sorry. That was a different funeral. It was in the Valley, right on Lankershim, right near Universal Studios, where him and I had spent so much time and stuff. So they're having a funeral for Jim Jackson. You know, I asked a few people like Jay, I was like, you want to come? And he's like, I can't, I'm busy. And Moj was just like, no, I got something going on. So I was like, oh man, like I can't get nobody to go to Jim's funeral with me. And Jim was like such a big part of our lives and shit. And then I was driving to the funeral and going like, I'm going to be the only one there because it's a fucking Tuesday and it's a Catholic church in Los Angeles. Like, nobody's fucking going to be there for this guy. Like, this place is going to be empty, and fucking all those people he talked about and shit like that, they ain't going to fucking be there. And I was getting bitter as I was driving over because I was like, this guy deserved better, man, and shit. I get to the church, fucking open the doors, walk in the back. I had to stand in the back the whole fucking mass because every seat was taken. The pews were fucking full. And the first person I see when I walked into the church, sitting on in the middle of the right half of the church, halfway down the aisle, middle of the pews, right on the end pew, is Sam Raimi, who I'd never seen before in my life in relation to Jim. Only ever heard Jim talk about him, to the point where me and Scott were like, maybe he wasn't as close with Sam Raimi as he liked to lead us to believe and shit like that. But there was Sam Raimi, fucking like one of the biggest directors on the planet, took time off on a fucking Tuesday morning to see his buddy off and shit like that. So afterwards, we all go to, he liked Dan Tana's, but he started going to this other place, Craig's. The guy who was the maitre d' went to Craig's. So Jim started going there and stuff. And we had the eulogy, the after the wake party and stuff. And, you know, Sean Daniel, who was his partner, who also produced Mallrats with us, was like, Kevin, you got to talk about Jim. Everyone's getting up talking about Jim. So I got up to talk about Jim, and I start telling the story about, like, Jim Jacks, you got to understand, man, like, he had a catchphrase, the way that, like, Bart Simpson says, like, don't have a cow, man. Like, and if you knew Jim, you know what that catchphrase is, and it's like, you know. And everyone started laughing because Jim had this kind of nervous tick that he would punctuate everything he said with the phrase, like, you know. So, you know, mostly when he was trying to be humorous. So he'd be like, you know, Jay, talk about Jason Music, Jay left chicken grease all over the phone, like, you know, like, you know, like, you know. And that was, like, you know, was your cue to laugh. Like, that was him going, like, laugh now. Kind of the same way that Jason Mewes goes Snoogans. That was Jim's version of Snoogans. He punctuated everything with, like, you know. So I was talking about that, and I was, you know, I talked about the time where me and Scott got him laughing so fucking hard, or really he got himself laughing so fucking hard that we saw him do a string of Like You Know for over a minute long, where he was laughing so hard. He'd worked himself up into like a red-faced lather of laughing. I forget what the fuck we were talking about. I wish I could remember because, my God, it almost killed the man. It was so funny. And he would be like, blah, 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 blah. Like it out, 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 like it. And we'd seen him say, Like You Know, 3 times in a row. But he was just kept fucking doing it. Me and Scott were staring at him like, is this motherfucker having a stroke? Did his brain just break? And he would wind down and then wind up. So he'd be like, like it out, 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 like it out. It was the funniest fucking thing he'd ever heard. So I'm telling the crowd this story, and they're all going nuts because they know this version of Jim Jackson, shit like that. And so when I'm done telling the funny story, I said, but before I wrap up, I just want to take this moment to point out and shout out Sam Raimi. I said, Sam, we met once years ago at a premiere and stuff, but I heard your name all the time when I was hanging out with Jim. While we were making Mallrats, Jim would take us out to eat. He would take us to the movies. We lived at Jim's house, and he would constantly tell us stories about making movies with his friends, and he always talked about you. And I said, and when I was driving over here to the funeral today, I felt mad because I thought I was going to walk in and nobody was going to be here to honor Jim, like in a Catholic church and fucking the City of Angels. What, am I crazy? I said, and I walk in, you were one of the first persons I saw. I said, that would have made it. Like you validated everything he ever said about you, man. Like you were his true friend and stuff. And I thank you for being there. So, you know, afterwards, Raimi, he calls everyone buddy. So he's like, buddy, thanks, buddy. Like, do you ever see that one movie that fucking Coen brothers did? They did him in, what is it? Oh, Hudsucker Proxy. The guy in the elevator was like, oh, buddy. That's literally Sam Raimi. That's how he talked. So, you know, he was like, buddy, that was really beautiful, buddy. Thanks for saying that, buddy. You know, never says your name, just calls you buddy a lot. So, you know, it was really nice. And I had this moment and I'm walking out, I'm heading to my car, you know, and I'm like, I feel good about myself. I fucking did a good thing for my dead friend. And I felt very self-satisfied. And I'm just about to get out of the fucking building, just about to get out of Craig's. And my car is just waiting on the other side of the door. And a filmmaker stops me, a young filmmaker. And he goes, hey, man, I'm this guy. And he says his name. And I was like, oh, how are you? And he goes, I just wanted to tell you that, like, I was hanging out with Jim for, like, the last 5 years. Sorry, there's a fly in here. The last 5 years, I was been hanging out with Jim. And we go to dinner with him at Craig's, just like, fuck, I feel like it's the VP debate. Get out of here. I go to Craig's with Jim all the time. The way you talked about, like, you go and he'd sit around and talk about, like, Sam Raimi and stuff like that. He still did that. Like, up until like a week ago before he died, we were here at Craig's and he was just telling stories about all the people he made movies with and stuff. And I was like, get out of here. I was like, well, that's awesome, man. I was like, you know, good to hear. And I was like, boy, you know, I wish I'd been there. That's just some shit you say, right? Like, what are you supposed to say to that sentiment? So, of course, I'm like, boy, I wish I'd been there to hear that. And he goes, without missing a beat, this filmmaker goes, one of my favorite storytellers on the planet because of the way he fucking dropped the hammer with this moment. He goes, you would have loved to have been there because all he did was talk about you. Wow. I fucking broke down right there, man. I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, the way you say that he talked about Sam Raimi and shit, that's how Jim Jacks always talked about you. He's going, every fucking meal I had with this guy, I had to hear some story about how you and him made Mallrats together. And so
oh, wow.
I was like, oh my God, I got to make a Mallrats sequel. Like, I have to for my dead friend. So with a ghost as a co-writer, I wrote Mallrats 2, Die Hard in a Mall. We're not going to make that movie. It got hacked up for parts. It took so long to try to get made. Universal wasn't interested. Nobody was interested. So eventually I hacked it up for parts. The entire third act of Mallrats 2 became the third act of Jay and Silent Bob reboot, including Iron Bob. Iron Bob was created from Mallrats 2. Wow. So I hacked that fucker up for parts to make Jay and Silent Bob reboot because I was like, well, clearly we're never going to make either Clerks 3 or Mallrats 2, so this is as close as I'll ever get. Then Jay and Silent Bob reboot wound up reverse engineering the other two to the point where they're both in play, where, like, suddenly, you know, Universal wound up co-financing Jay and Silent Bob reboot on the foreign end of the equation. So Jasper, our exec, was like, hey, we liked working with you, man, and we want to keep it going. What do you want to do next? He was like, can we bring you material? Can we bring you books to adapt? Like, once again, somebody was like, can we turn you into a real filmmaker? And I said, honestly, you guys have something in mind that I would love to fucking play with. I've been trying to play with for like 5 years. And he's like, Mallrats? I was like, yeah, I want to do Mallrats sequel. So he's like, all right, if that's what you want. He's going, let's look into it. So we started moving toward a Mallrats sequel. And at that point, I'm like, oh, fuck. I hacked up the script for fucking parts. What do I do? And I actually had to have this come to Jesus conversation with myself about a Mallrats sequel. Like, look, I know you wrote that Die Hard in a Mall script, and it was called Mallrats 2 Die Hard in a Mall for Jim, because that's the joke that you told him back in 1995. But for a moment, imagine if you were somebody that has loved Mallrats for the last 25 years. And then finally somebody's like, we're doing a fucking sequel, which right away you're like, well, that might be ill-advised, but like, maybe I'll give it a shot. And then you go to see this Mallrats sequel. And what it turns out to be is instead like a Die Hard parody where Brody becomes John McClane. And it's all the same characters, but none of them acting in the familiar way. Mallrats is literally a movie about two dudes who get broken up with. They go to the fucking mall, and by the end of the movie, they get to go back out with their girlfriends again. And there's a game show. Like, nothing really happens. It's real day in the life shit. And this Die Hard version of it was so plotted within an inch of its fucking life and stuff. It had terrorists. They weren't Russian terrorists like it was in Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. They were Canadian terrorists. But it turned out to be they weren't even Canadian terrorists. It was Mr. Svenning in disguise, trying to like destroy them all, blow it up. So it was an ill-advised version of a Mallrats sequel to make. Even, and I say that as the storyteller. Like, when I had a bit of distance from it, I was like, thank God we didn't do that version, because people would have been baffled. They're like, why do you think this is what Mallrats 2 looks like? What, are you out of your mind? Mallrats 2 is a Die Hard ripoff movie? Like, where'd you come up with that idea? And then I have to explain to him, like, oh, my dead friend who I told in 1995 that I would do this story to. So I got to write another Mallrats sequel, a completely different one. And I saved some parts of the other one that I really liked that still played and stuff. But Twilight of the Mallrats more closely resembles Mallrats than Die Hard 2, or than Mallrats 2 Die Hard in a Mall ever resembled Mallrats. Like, in Twilight of the Mallrats, it begins the same fucking way with like people getting broken up with and deciding to go to spend their day at the mall to get over it. And the only difference being that like nobody goes to the fucking mall anymore except the one guy. Brody like winds up being a bit more like me. Brody in Mallrats was more like Walter Flanagan. Like, the character is stolen from my friend Walter Flanagan. That's exactly who he was when we were younger. Brody in Mallrats 2 a little more closely reflects me, in as much as Brody did one clever thing 25 years ago, and he's still talking about it 25 years later. And pop culture shifted in such a way where it couldn't be denied that he knew a little bit about what he was talking about. So, you know, it's not too far of a stretch from my own world as well. I got very lucky with fucking Mallrats. Like, when Mallrats came out, we were talking about a world where everybody knew who Stan Lee was, and that was not the case in 1995. Now, we all know who Stan Lee was, and we got to see him in movies for years and years and years and stuff. Like, comic book culture became the center, the heart of pop culture, and Mallrats was just well positioned because we dealt with it, you know, before anyone was talking about it and stuff. So at that point in writing Twilight of the Mallrats, I was like, it better closely resemble the thing you're sequelizing. And now it absolutely does. I love the story. It's funny. It's beautiful. It's nostalgic as fuck, of course, because why would you bother making a sequel to a movie 25 years later unless it involves some form of nostalgia? But it's also about letting that shit go as well. Oh, cool. So it turned into something that I'm really happy with. And it seems like 2021, by midway through the year to the end of the year, it looks like we'll be gearing up for production, which is kind of exciting.
Amazing news. And Dan, should we tell our personal stories and then throw to the audience? What do you think?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay,
so
go first? We've both got Kevin Smith stories that we'd like to regale to you.
Please.
you won't recognize me. Mine comes from 20 years ago. I didn't have this big beard back then, but 20 years ago, I was in the States. I went for dinner with Kay Farrell, Will Ferrell's mum. And we talked about movies. She asked me who my favorite directors were. And I said, Martin Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, Kevin Smith. And she says, well, my son is making a Kevin Smith movie at the moment. Would you like to come and visit the set? And I was like, wow, yeah, who's your son? And she said, Will Ferrell. I didn't know who he was because back then he hadn't come over to the UK yet. I was like,
right,
okay.
right.
And yeah, so we went to the set. You were so kind to me, Kevin. Like I told you I love comics. You called your assistant and got them to bring Chasing Dogma graphic novel for me. You treat me like a member of the family. The whole crew did. I helped.
Fucking rocks, man. Like,
yeah.
Holy shit. Like, especially like, it wasn't like you came from Inner Sanctum, right? Like you came from like Will Ferrell's mom, which of course would come with a degree of like, well, we got to respect this guest. But how nice to hear that you like here's a copy of Chasing Dogma. Let's talk comic books. What scene were we shooting?
So it was when Will was it was basically the first confrontation with Will. So yeah, and basically I don't want to go on about it too much because you know this is your time, not mine. But I just wanted. I
love this story. Are you kidding me? Like fucking, you know how many people I meet who were there for Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back? Like only Jay. You know, the circle gets smaller every year. So it's nice meeting somebody who's like, no, I was there. That really happened.
And basically, you know, it put me on the path that I'm on today because I was so happy on that film set. For the rest of my life, I went out of my way to get back onto film sets. So you literally, with your kindness, changed my life, Kevin. So, you know, thank you for that day. Yeah,
that rocks, man. Thank you for sharing that. Heavens. It's so weird that you said like you wouldn't recognize me with the beard because when we first started talking, when you guys first popped up, I was like, he looks familiar. I must have spoken to him somewhere along the way. Like I thought you were like a film journalist that I spoke to and stuff. But like from here on up, there was something familiar about you. That's crazy, man. That's wild.
The thing you might remember is that basically to kind of justify, you know, being there, people kept asking me, "Who are you? Who are you?" And so I said, "Oh, I'm Will's dad, right?" So, and then at the end of the day, you know, because I love your movies, I know how much you love John Hughes. I quoted Ferris Bueller to Will, and I said, "Do you have a kiss for Daddy?" And tapped my cheek, and he gave me a big kiss in front of everyone. Got a good laugh. I made my hero laugh. I made you laugh. So
look at you, man. You fucking dropped. You know how difficult it is to bomb by a movie set, period? Because you always feel like, oh, I'm out of place here. But to come into the mix and then fucking win the room, man. Like, did you just after that, like, I'm getting on a plane and fucking getting out of here? It gets no better than this.
That was me done. That was me done. But, Dan also has an amazing story.
Well, my story is secondhand, I'm afraid. My wife, not long after I met her, she was a film student at Columbia in the States, and a student film that she produced won a Student Academy Award, and you presented her with her award. But because of various delays, I think the award ceremony for that was delayed by like 3 or 4 hours. And so they kept all these students quiet with free champagne, which they were not ready for. And so by the time she's being called up on stage, by the time the short film, which was called Pop Foul, won the award, her colleagues in the audience were like, "You have to squeeze Kevin's ass." So they filmed this award ceremony, but they didn't broadcast it on television. I've seen it, however. She has a copy of it. And your face as she passes you on stage and she grabs your ass.
I must have blocked that. And you'd imagine you'd remember something like that. Get out of here. So she actually did it? She had enough champagne in her to be like,
yeah, she did, and that's not her personality type at all. So
I mean, God bless her. There was a lot of ass to grab back then as well, man. Luckily she didn't sprain a finger.
I love
so
it.
yeah, there you go.
Well, let's go with some of these audience questions because we've got quite a few. Fly Fidelity on YouTube asks, do you have a favorite podcasting experience as a prolific podcaster yourself?
A lot of the Fat Man on Batman episodes were pretty epic because you got to sit down with people that wrote your childhood. You know, of course, I've interviewed Stan a number of times since 1995, but having him on the podcast, that was pretty much a highlight as well. It was a distilled version of conversations we'd had before. On one of my favorites we've ever done, I mean, in terms of like Smodcast 259, The Walrus and the Carpenter stands out because that's where Tusk came from. So that probably is the single best, my single most favorite podcasting experience because it resulted in like a fucking movie and stuff. But I remember on an episode of Smodcast, I sat down with Gerard and Mikey Way from My Chemical Romance, and I made them go through the lyrics of Welcome to the Black Parade. So we played the song like line by line, then I'd pause it and be like, all right, where did that line come from? What does that mean? Why did you write that line? It was like you rarely get to do that with an artist where you're like, I need to know every point of inspiration that made the thing that I love so much. So can you tell me? And I got to deep dive into that song, which I absolutely love, with like the guys responsible for it. And then they were able to tell me the history of it. They were able to tell me some shit just meant nothing. He was like, that just rhymed, you know, and stuff like that. So I love those episodes of the podcast, man. Those were really special. The ones I've done with my mom are pretty special because I won't have her forever. The one I wish that I had, the one that got away, so to speak, is my dad. I never put my dad on a podcast. I don't think it existed at that point. He died in like 2003. So it was before I got into podcasting. We started podcasting in February 2007. So I often wish, like, man, if he had hung out for a little bit longer, it would have been great to get him on one of the podcasts. I honestly would have had probably a deeper conversation than I'd ever really had with him in my life. But you know, missed opportunity because he passed away. I hate to bring it all down. It was such a downer ending. Certainly not with the questioner wanted. It was like, what's your favorite memory? I'm like, my dad died once, you know.
So to touch on a question we almost asked, but so this is the road asked under the radar horror films that you might recommend. To sort of pad that a little, you've touched into horror, like you're outside the view askew stuff, whether it's Tusk, Red State, which I'd say is probably my favorite film of yours, other than Mallrats, which I adored, and even your segment in Holidays. You obviously have a sort of a pull towards horror. Obviously, horror and comedy share a space in the brain. Is that something you want to return to? And what would you recommend to someone asking for Halloween recommendations?
Would I return to it? Absolutely. I love Red State and Tusk because they look like movies that I remember seeing in my childhood but can't actually point to. Like Tusk, when we were making it the whole way, I kept saying, like, this looks like a movie that I never saw when I was a kid, but I'm sure that I saw it. Like it just, and that's because it's made up of a lot of imagery from my life, particularly my childhood. Because Tusk was so centered on like a character or like who went to sea and met a walrus and shit. It had this kind of nautical like flavor to it. And since we were, you know, meant to be in fucking Winnipeg and landlocked Manitoba, that was, you know, like kind of incongruous. And that came from my father. My father like loved the sea. And we at least lived near the water, but he didn't go out on the water. But he like fancied himself a fucking seaman, which sounds, you know, dirtier than I meant it. But he kind of wound up informing that character. And then I just got to put a bunch of disturbing shit in it. Like I'm not like like John Carpenter is a master horror filmmaker. He knows how to push all your buttons. He knows how to set up a scare properly and whatnot. Born to make that kind of film, and many others as well, as we saw by Starman. I don't think I'm that person, but I love horror movies and I love them growing up. Like, I wanted to be a makeup effects person long before I ever wanted to be like a filmmaker. You know, when I was a kid in my teens, I had nose putty and fake blood and shit like that. I wanted to be Tom Savini. I wanted to be Rick Baker. So it's in my blood, but I don't think I know how to do it like properly. I can't horrify you, but I can unsettle you. That I'm good at. And so Red State and Tusk are movies that unsettle the audience. Like Tusk particularly. They don't particularly horrify, but they definitely unsettle. And they don't, you know, in many cases, I don't think they go so far as, like, Tusk, I don't see as disturbing. I see it as more unsettling. Red State is disturbing because you're like, oh, fuck, we're living in it right now. Like, you know, it has an air of reality to it to some degree, whereas Tusk has the remove of, like, pretty sure nobody's ever going to do this to anybody else, let alone me. But the grotesque imagery and the fact that we went practical and used rubber effects ties into something really primal, particularly for people who didn't grow up watching rubber monster movies. Like, you know, that movie got the biggest, like, what the fuck reaction from kids who didn't grow up in the 80s. That's what I found really surprising. People who grew up the same time I grew up were like, oh yeah, like, it's fucked up, but, like, you know, that's what they did. Like, anyone who grew up watching Reanimator didn't flinch watching Tusk. Even when we did snap zoom into him and he fucking looks all fucked up, they were like, bro, I've watched a guy hold his head and eat a woman out. Like, in the 80s. You think you can impress me? So I don't think I can horrify, but I do think I can unsettle. I horrify when unintentionally. Like, I horrified people with Jersey Girl. But I can unsettle people, like, if I put my mind to it with shit like Tusk and with Red State as well. Do I see myself doing that again? I know we're going to do Moose Jaws. That's coming up very soon. But that is closer in spirit to Yoga Hosers, please don't leave, than it is to Tusk or Red State. Like, Red State plays plausible. Red State is unsettling because you're like, that could happen. Like, there's nothing in it that's like, that's beyond the pale. It's like, no, all this adds up. This checks out. You know, Tusk is unsettling because body horror is unsettling in general. And the idea that this guy went for walrus, and then the idea that his friends don't even try to bust him out of the suit at the end and shit like that. All of it kind of unsettles. Yoga Hosers is like, you know, horror comedy. So we're not doing that exactly with Moose Jaws. But it's closer to that sensibility because the movie's ridiculous to start with. It's about a man-eating fucking moose. So it'll have the flair of the horror stuff that I've done, but it won't be the horror thing that I've done. Like, you know, the holidays segment, Halloween, is more horrifying or unsettling rather than Moose Jaws will ever be. You know, Moose Jaws is going to be more like, oh, fuck, they made Jaws, but with a moose. That's so fucked up. And, you know, you'll enjoy it the closer we get to the movie. The more they're like, oh, they did that scene. Oh, they did that scene. So it's not strictly, even though it'll be like considered horror or comedy horror, it's not close to like Red State or Tusk. I started writing one that's closer to that, closer to Red State, and not in terms of, you know, it examines a cult or religious, you know, a religion or something like that, but just in that it's very plausible and unsettling and could easily happen to people. Like, it's not like Tusk where it's like, well, first you'd have to fucking want to sew somebody into a fucking old human walrus. And it's not like Yoga Hosers where you're like, oh my God, little fucking Bratzy soldiers have come to life and shit. It's more like Red State and even more like Halloween. Like, Halloween is pretty plausible. The only thing that like bugs me about Halloween to this day is how many people like right away were like, why wouldn't he just cut the wire? Like, why has he got to cut it off? Cut the wire. And I'm like, well, maybe he's not thinking properly, okay? Or maybe they thought of it. And the moment he goes for the wire, they're going to turn the juice on. Or maybe it's a cut-proof wire. I wish I'd included one fucking line where they were like, thank God we put a cut-proof wire in there. It would have saved me a few headaches down the road. So I would say the one that I'm writing now, which I'm not like, and this is a big one that I'm going to do, but it's very small. It's a little exercise in fucking interpersonal horror. it's about being in a relationship. It's a marriage movie. And it doesn't come from my own marriage where I'm like, I hate my wife. I actually really like my wife. But it is about how well you know a person and stuff like that. And so it came off of, saw a very small horror movie. I forget what it was called. I want to say it's Frozen, but that's probably not it. But Genesis Rodriguez, who is in Tusk and Yoga Hosers, she was in it, where it's her and her boyfriend, and they're trapped in a fucking car in a snowstorm, and they're trapped under this ice. And I remember watching the movie going like, ingenious. This movie cost $1.05. It's two people in a fucking car, and it all works. They can't leave the car because that's the premise of the movie. I said, what a great idea for a fucking low-budget horror flick. It's all focused on the performances and the psychological trauma of the situation and stuff like that. So it got my wheels turning about something similar. And, it's not nearly the same thing at all, but it was like, I want to play with two people in the middle of nowhere. Because A, that's cheap, and B, it's fucking scary, man. Especially when it's the person you think you know best in this world and stuff. So it's closer in spirit to Red State in as much as like it's plausible and could happen. But it's not like, there's a cult and they got guns and they're fucking killing gay people and stuff. It's not nearly as plotted. It's a little more like naturalistic. And also what I like about it is it has the air of a movie that you would go to and come out of, or let's be honest, watch at home, and then like get into deep conversations with your significant other about. Like how when we saw Fatal Attraction back in the day, like fucking, all of a sudden you saw your parents being like, and what exactly about that is so scary, shit like that. What do you got to worry about and things like that. So it's a movie that'll create like chatter between couples. Like, would you do that? That kind of thing.
Oh, that sounds great. And just to bring it back to Mallrats, Sean Mann asks, can you ask Kevin about his experience working with Drew Struzan on the awesome poster art? I love the art. Kind of reminds me of Army of Darkness. Was that an influence? And yeah, can you talk about working with Drew?
I have the original artwork in the 2 rooms away from here, hanging in the hallway of my house. I bought it. Let me see. This is going to be gross, but this is just to impress upon you how important an artist Drew Struzan is. I bought this artwork for cheap in, I want to say 2000, 2003. Suddenly it came up. I think Dave Mandel, who is a friend of mine who did Veep, and he used to write for Curb Your Enthusiasm and stuff. He's a big art collector, comic book art collector particularly. He's got a lot of original pages from Frank Miller's Dark Knight and stuff like that. Got a multi-million-dollar collection that he's been collecting for a while when it was like cheaper. Now it's worth fucking way more and stuff. So he told me, he's like, Drew Struzan's Mallrats art, the poster, the original art, is up for sale. And I was like, Mallrats. Like, I mean, I love that poster, but that movie hurt. Like, do I really want to buy it? And I was like, well, what are the chances? Like, I in my head, I rationalized it going, you co-created the artwork because I did a fucking stick figure sketch of that artwork and gave it to Universal Marketing, who in turn gave it to Drew Struzan, who in turn gave us that poster that when I saw it, me and Mosier were like, holy shit, it looks like the stick figure drawing that we did, but like way better and shit. So I said, all right, you know what? I will own the Mallrats poster. How much is it? And he's like, 30 grand. And I'm like, what? 30 grand? That's like a car or a house. Small house, but a good down payment on a decent house. Like, can't fucking pay that for that. But then I eventually got around to it where I was just like, you know what they ain't making any more of in this world? Fucking original Drew Struzan Mallrats artwork. So I was like, here's your one chance. Fucking do it. And so I spent the money on it. So fucking glad I did, because that piece now is invaluable to me. And one of like when people come into my house, like, is that the fucking original artwork? Like, it's so stunning to see. You see all the brush strokes, you see the mastery of Struzan's work. And how we arrived at him was marketing folks at Gramercy had done a few different mock-ups of posters. The best one, the one that I liked the best, was they reached out to Peter Bagg, who does the comic book or did the comic book Hate. And they were like, you know, look, this is close to the sensibility.
Wow.
Want to do a Mallrats poster? And so they gave me a mock-up of a Mallrats poster done with Peter Bagg's art using blow-ups of his characters from his comic book Hate and stuff. Years later, he sent me a note because I'd seen an issue of Hate in the background. There was a Mallrats poster. And I was like, oh my God, I'm a huge Hate fan. And I made Mallrats. Like, what's the story? And he wrote me back this lovely little postcard going like, they hired me, tried to hire me in 1995 to design a Mallrats poster, and I never got around to it and stuff. So it was kind of a joke that I threw it in the background and stuff. So his, like, using the Bagg art was the poster that I leaned toward the most, which, to be fair, wasn't the most marketable poster for the movie. It's using cartoon characters to sell a live action film. So I didn't like any of the artwork that they kept giving us. Like, it kind of looked like the box art to the VHS and the first Laserdisc, the fucking Shannon Doherty front and center, weird swirly circle and shit like that. So I said, can't we get somebody really good? Like, what about the guy that does all the Star Wars posters, the Raiders of the Lost Ark poster? Like, like he does every poster you ever see, man, like that guy. And they're like, Drew Struzan? I said, what did he do? And I said, yes, that's the man. They're like, you want Drew Struzan to do your poster? And I was like, yeah, he makes wicked posters. And they're like, all right. And so we gave him the kind of stick figure design and sent it in. And like 2 weeks later, got like a sketched version of what the poster would be, and then a painted version of it and stuff shortly thereafter. And we were blown away. Like, me and Mosier were in love. All we could see was like, this poster is going to look so great in our office, man. Holy shit. We didn't think like marketers. When we even came up with a sketch of the poster, it wasn't like, ooh, what will sell the movie? It was, ooh, what's going to look good on our wall? And eventually we chose the poster artist based on like, what would look amazing? Who do we love? And we went with Drew Struzan. But nobody, like, and when I say nobody, I mean me or Scott, didn't stop to think, what would be the best way to sell the movie? Never mind like a cool poster for your office, because they made bus stop ads of that giant poster of the Mallrats artwork. Get the fuck out, bro. I'm not the vice president. They made giant bus stop poster ads. And I remember, and I've got one framed in my office in Jersey. I remember looking at it in a bus stop and being like, well, I know that Mallrats is a movie. But if you saw this as you're driving down the road and you've got 2.3 seconds to look at the image, you're going to think that it's a magazine, because it didn't even look like a comic book, because everyone was so photorealistically painted and stuff. So what was an amazing poster that I don't regret, because it still hangs in my, got the original artwork hanging in my house and shit, was not the best way to sell that movie. Now, it wound up aging into a great way to sell the movie and became a classic Drew Struzan poster and stuff. But in the moment, nobody was thinking about marketing, and it did not help the movie one iota. That being said, like, it hanging in my house, like, it's a multiple hallmark for me. Number one, it's like, hey, Mallrats, fucking, like, it all worked out and stuff. And that's my second movie, and that's where I met Stan Lee. And also, hey, Mallrats, I got a Drew Struzan original, like, right in my house. Holy shit. But also, it's a reminder that, like, the story's never done. Like, 1995, Saturday morning after the movie comes out, we knew the story of Mallrats. We were cocksure we knew the story of Mallrats. And now, 25 years later, I still can't tell you the real story of Mallrats, because it keeps going. The story's never ended. I thought I could tell you the story in 95 because it was complete. We pitched a movie, we made a movie, the movie tanked, and nobody ever talked about it ever again. Instead, it aged differently. And so the story keeps going, so much so that it's like, this exists. This is a big part of the story. Having, putting more gas in the tank of a movie that's been driving around the parking lot of the mall for 25 fucking years. To have Arrow fucking legitimize us with a fat ass, look how this thick as a dick, a fat ass multi-disc fucking collection of the movie, a legacy rendition of the movie, puts gas in the tank, keeps the story going. Story's not done. Like, if you're telling the story of Mallrats, which, let's take the Wikipedia page. If that's the story of Mallrats, they're going to now add, and then Arrow Video, like, put out a Mondo edition of it. in fucking 2020 and shit. Though in a terrible year where the whole world was on fire, one good thing happened. Arrow did Mallrats. And then we'll make Mallrats 2, and the story will expand again. And who knows if that's good or bad? Like, we could be sitting here and me going like, oh, it's going to be great. Cut to 2 years from now, I'm like, why the fuck did I make Mallrats 2? Doesn't matter. The story is going to keep being told. What was once a dead-end, close-ended story has now become literally the story of my life, or at least one of them. It never ends fascination with me. I fucking marvel at the life of Mallrats, and I'm not baffled by it. I'm not like, why do people like this movie? I completely fucking get it. I love Mallrats too. But being there for when it died, it was like watching, like, it was like a fucking watching somebody die, and then all of a sudden they came back to life and then had this great fucking life, and they're your friend to this day. And you were like, I watched you fucking die, and I wrote you off as dead myself. I didn't even try to resuscitate you because dead is dead. But look, fucking, you must have found the pet cemetery because you just keep on fucking going.
I love it. And I think the perfect way to end the story of the night. We had you for an hour, and we've actually had you for 2 hours, so we should let you go. But
thank you so much for your time.
Do you have any final thoughts, Dan?
Just thanks, unending thanks for the films, for your time tonight. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for having.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin. And yeah, thanks to everyone for watching. And we promise to be more professional next time. Thank you, Kevin.